heathens. Welcome to Girls Gone Godless, the podcast where we may not be God's children, but we still know a false prophet when we see one, especially when they show up in orange concealer and adult diapers.
I'm Aaliyah.
I'm Christina.
And I'm Noe.
Today we have the pleasure of interviewing Daniella Mestyanek Young, who you may know as Knitting Cult Lady on TikTok. After escaping the infamous Children of God cult, Daniella made history in the U.S. Army. She became a best-selling author and has gained a huge following on social media as a sort of professional bullshit detector. She pulls zero punches when it comes to calling out cults, the patriarchy, and this travesty of an administration, all while knitting or doing some other fabulous craft. She is brilliant, snarky, and colorful, and we are so honored to have her on. I was not raised with religion, and so it has just always fascinated me, and I just sit back and go, what the fuck, all the time.
Let me just say, I think it's so brilliant that you have Christina. So I wrote a memoir about my life in a cult and in the army. And I was like, I was always going to do that with a co-writer because I knew I needed a normal person to help me explain to the outside world. One of my biggest pet peeves about military or cult books, they just drop all this info on you, and it's like you can't give someone all that. But it's also something I tell people, military Mormons, people who are just deconstructing a high control environment, and you need people who speak the language. You need people who know what growing up under high control was like. But you also need people who don't get it to ask you questions and help you translate it. Joey, I'm sure you probably relate to this. And Aaliyah, I don't know about you, but for a lot of us, cult babies, it's always trying to translate your experience to the outside world, and feeling different
all the time
can be so hard.
Yeah.
Right.
And sometimes it's just great because I was raised in this weirdness. And so to me, a lot of it is normalized. But then when Christina is like, oh my God, what the fuck? That's very validating, So it's good to have someone be like, no, this is weird. And I'm like, you're right. That is really weird.
And I really have tried to make it part of my platform to just validate for all the ex-Mormons that yes, that was a cult. That's a dangerous, bad cult. And
yeah,
I always say I have the value of the extreme story. Nobody ever tells me, oh, Daniella, Children of God, that wasn't a cult.
Right.
And so I can't imagine what it must be like to have that realization about Mormonism, and then have regular Americans go oh, that's not, that wasn't.
Right. It's not that bad.
Are you sure it's not a cult? I went into a fancy building to learn secret handshakes and get a new name. You're saying that that's not a cult?
The temple is the wackiest, cultiest cult stuff, right? I'm sorry. That is
really
it
really is.
It's that they hide from their own followers. I mean, they don't teach you that as a kid. It's all so secretive.
Yeah.
I had no idea what my family was doing in the temple.
It kind of brings me joy that it's a wake-up moment for so many Mormons going to the temple, because I'm like, yeah, they just lie to you. They just lie to you that it's not, that it's not a cult.
And going through the temple was what did it for me. That was my final straw with the church, was just how weird it was and how uncomfortable I was, and just how it just didn't make sense with anything that I knew about what the Bible says or who God or Jesus is supposedly. None of it was congruent. And so for me, I was like, okay, that's it. It was an instant moment for me. There was, I don't know, from once I went through the temple and saw how weird it was, there was no turning back.
Right.
That was it.
Why does God need to have a secret code name for me to get into heaven?
Yeah.
He doesn't know me?
Yeah.
Right.
I'm I swear that's the same God that knows all the hairs on my head, right? That's the same guy. Yeah.
This is something so important about cults and just cult dynamics in general, though, is the wacky rituals, and I open Uncultured in my prologue. I'm in basic training, right? Being yelled at and got to hold a 50-pound duffel bag above your head for about 2 to 3 hours. And it's this very, very significant moment. It's the first part of basic training. You have no idea what's going on. And it is impossible and it's irrational, right? None of y'all have probably ever gone outside and held 50 pounds above your head for 3 hours.
Right.
And it's also
No.
impossible. So you're going to drop it. You're going to get yelled at. You're going to have to pick it up and keep trying and keep dropping it, keep getting yelled at. And these are great tools for cults. Anything impossible keeps you striving. Cults use purity requirements like that. But the wackiness, right? There are studies that show that like when we do the first just wacky thing for a group, like we just push ourselves past that, we're like, nope, just do it. We are very unlikely to resist future wacky things. So it's
Like, it
like, and
acclimates
in
you
basic
to
training, like this is the moment. Like some people just can't make it and they end up like not moving forward. And everyone else is like, nope. And we actually, in military language, use the term drink the Kool-Aid quite regularly for when we're just going to do ridiculous stuff. And we all know it's ridiculous, but we're all going to do it anyway. So, by the way, to go back to my writing thing, right? I was like, the woman I found was just like this nice Jewish girl. And she thinks that people who joined cults in the 60s and women who joined the military in the early 2000s are kind of equally as strange. So she can help me
Right.
explain,
Yeah.
because who goes into that willingly? Turns out lots of cult kids.
Right.
I have found go into the military and other government, other high control environments. It's very common.
Because you find your comfort in that, right? It's the
Yeah.
structure, it's the ritual, it's the community that's like built in.
Yeah.
A common theme among the people that we've interviewed on the podcast is that people who have left religion, the thing that they miss the most is the community aspect of it. So I can only imagine that living in a legitimate, bona fide, full-on cult, the thing that you're seeking is that structure and that community and that ritual.
And, that was such a big thing for me. Like I went from living, growing up with hundreds of people or at least dozens of people to all of a sudden I was like in an apartment by myself most of the time, just going to high school, really failing hard to make friends. Not in part just because there were 4,000 students, just nobody sees you, especially when you're weird. And college was was probably too unstructured for me, like for my comfort. And so going back in the military felt very safe for me in a lot of ways. And, in the prologue of my book, I'm holding the duffel bag over my head, getting yelled at. And I'm like, oh, I just joined another cult. But I swear my next thought was like, okay, I'm going to be better at it than these suckers. Like I've showered
Right.
in front of people my whole lives. Privacy, what's that?
Right.
The number one thing that breaks people is lack of privacy. And to me, it was just like, what is that?
That was normal
Very
to you.
common for Mormons to go into the military.
Right. I was just going to say, isn't there like a huge number of Mormons like in the FBI and things like that? I feel like, don't they recruit them because
Yes.
they're usually
So-
squeaky clean and they don't ask
Yeah,
questions?
They speak
They
another
say that
language
the CIA
typically.
is full of Mormons. That's where the speaking another language really, really pays off too.
Right.
And then the FBI apparently is full of Catholics still from like
Oh.
J. Edgar Hoover days on, because they become these communities that hire their
Ah.
own.
Mm.
But yeah, there's a lot of Mormons. And actually in my new book, The Culting of America, I've written about this, like when children are being raised with this militaristic image of you are the army of God, I hope God sends me on a mission. They call MTC the boot camp of Mormon greatness, like
Yep.
it's not surprising that kids grow up
Right.
and go into the military and like it wasn't hard
Yeah.
compared to growing up,
Right. You're like, I've been doing this my whole life. I don't know what.
Yeah, I have
what's
more
so hard about this?
freedom, less abuse, money. Like, what was bad about that?
I was just going to ask if you can give us a brief overview of what the Children of God cult is for either those that have not read your book or
Yes.
for people who have not heard of it before.
So I always just describe the Children of God as like it fronted as we're love, faith, in Jesus, evangelical hippies. And it was really about religious prostitution, pedophilia, and, constant preparation for the apocalypse. Honestly, kind of like your basic 90s evangelicalism, just a tad more extreme. So David Berg, who was kicked out of Christian Missionary Alliance for being a pervert, basically, and then he goes and starts the Children of God. And the mission was, we are winning the world for Jesus. Like, this is God's prophet. He told us the world's going to end any day. We need to go win the world for Jesus. But it, evolved into using religious prostitution, which was its big scandal in the 80s, and then straight into just like literally advocating for pedophilia. And he, I always say he kind of took evangelical purity, which is still just like very close control of sex, and he flipped it. And he called it free love, and I call it forced polyamory. Like, when I was growing up, the concept was like, we lived in these big communes. We lived with 100, 150 people sometimes, especially where I was in the leadership circles. And it was like, there were schedules of who was supposed to sleep with whom that night. They called them sharing schedules. And like, people were married and in theory had nuclear families, but like, we slept in dorms. I saw my parents for an hour a day, and it was just a work cult and sex cult. But that's the famous sex cult before NXIVM. That's who we are.
Yeah. That's the modern version.
To me, it was, I guess, ironic, but that the cult was all about sex, and it was, opposite of purity culture, right? Sex was expected. Sex was seen as love. Sex, which it's like you're almost there. It's just if it was consensual, like it would, and then it would be like, okay, do what you want, sleep with who you want, like as long as it's consensual, that's fine. Obviously, they weren't doing that, but it was sex that got you excommunicated because you had sex with somebody outside of the cult. So it's just like so crazy that that's what got you out of the cult too. Like, that's,
I know, right? And that was even interesting because it's like, well, so for the first half of the Children of God's like existence, they were, straight up using religious prostitution to bring people in. And then when the whole AIDS crisis happened, they're like, all right, we're done with that. And now we're just going to turn very insular, as insular as like the FLDS. So at this point, like, the number one sin, which I think is true in a lot of cults, is, fellowship with the non-believer. And because we were the sex cult, like, the worst way you could fellowship with a non-believer was to have sex with them, right? So like, we weren't supposed to have really any relationships with outsiders that were for anything other than getting, money or donations from them or potentially converting them. But by the time I was growing up, we weren't doing a lot of converting. We were kind of known as a fringe group that was just getting a lot of donations and then existing and creating entertainment.
Right. So from my understanding, was it your grandparents that were initially in the Children of God?
Yes. So my grandfather in 1972 had a bad LSD trip and met Satan. And so the next morning he was in a park with his head in his hands, as one does when they meet Satan. And up come, 4 smiley, bouncy Children of God, shiny, happy white people to take him away. And so off he goes. Brings his, he's a college graduated CPA. He brings his 18-year-old girlfriend with him. Her mom is so happy to have a troubled teenager off her hands that she donates a house, which is part of how.
Oh, shit.
So my family brings property and finance guy, and that got us like embedded into leadership pretty quickly. And then my mom is born. Her mother leaves with her 2 youngest, but my mom is spirited away by the cult. By the time my mom is 14, she's pregnant by the other finance guy, her dad's boss, a few years older than her dad. And I'm born when she's just 15. And my dad's older than my grandfather. Sex cult math is what I call that.
Wow.
Yeah. And so my mom is out. She left about a decade after me. She had 7 kids in 14 years. She has 8 kids total. I am now 38. She's 53. Sometimes we fantasize that she'll be like 90 and I'll be 75 and we'll be in the retirement home together and we'll be spinning the yarns and like telling all the stories. And
you're so
we'll have the
close in
best time.
age. That's crazy.
So then you grew up in Brazil, right?
Yeah. So I was born in the Philippines, ironically, just as the Marcos regime was falling. And then I spent the first 3.5 years of my life in Japan. And then I was deported from Japan, snuck into Peru. We were there for a year, snuck into Brazil, there for a decade, then trafficked through Mexico and lower Texas as a carnival clown in my young teenage years. And then out of the cult by like close to 16. And then that was my first time really coming to live in the US, was also. So it was like different country, different culture. Like
And you moved in with a sister, right? A sister or stepsister?
a
Was it?
stepsister. It was someone
Okay.
I'd met about 3 times, I think. Wonderful, a decade older than me, had left the cult a few years prior and gave me a place to not be homeless
And
at.
did she leave on her own, or was she excommunicated?
She left on her own, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at 15, you're out of everything that you know. You're out of this cult. You're away from your mom because you said that she left 10 years later. Like, what? You had this older stepsister person, but like, what did you do? Like, how did you figure out life?
I was going to say, and I don't know I was in a cult at this point, right?
Okay,
I
that's
was just
true. Yeah.
in the family, and now I was not in the family, and I was free, and I was going to high school because I wanted to be a lawyer. And so, I mean, I show up to the high school in my district. I have 2 things, a U.S. passport and a social security card, and that is it. I've never had a vaccine in my life. I've never spent a day in school in my life. And they literally are kind of like, we can't enroll you here because you don't exist, but we need to know that you're enrolled somewhere within 5 days. Otherwise, we're going to have to send the cops to your house.
That's America in a nutshell.
Yeah. Ended up enrolling there, ended up taking 22 tests of classes I'd never taken, and then cobbling together high school in 2 years and graduating with my class and going on to college thanks to an absolutely amazing counselor who saw me and saw that I needed help and put me on the college path, and then went to college. During I think it was like at the end of my junior year was when the Children of God had a pretty significant murder-suicide. So one of the reasons the Children of God is famous as the pedophile cult is because they had this 762-page manual of how to raise a sexually liberated child with photos. And so this boy grew up and, took the life of one of his abusers and then took his own life. And I was getting ready to go to high school. And then I heard on television, Davidito, Children of God cult. And I have this moment, I'm 17, where I'm standing there going, oh, I grew up in a cult. And it's that moment where you just like get it. And then I was like, oh, that's why I'm so weird. Because before that, when I'm 15 in the high school, like I'm from another planet. It's not as simple as like another country. Like I don't have really the terminology for cult because all I'd ever been told was we weren't a cult. And so it wasn't until that. So then I go off to college just kind of deciding like, well, forget that. I'm going to be a new person and I'm just going to be the best student. And I go to college and then go into the military. So cult baby is a term that Children of God survivors came up with because some of us don't relate to being cult survivors. As a child, I was their prisoner for 15 years. I don't know if I ever believed it, but from about the age of 5 or 6, I know I didn't. And nothing they could do could make me. However, when I went into the army, like I decided to buy in that day. And I was like, I'm going to be super soldier. And so I relate to sort of the sort of brainwashing and high control environment a lot on the army side for me, which is interesting.
Right. That makes sense. And for me, it's kind of similar because, like I said, my family is Mormon, but from a very young age, I don't think I ever really believed it. So I don't necessarily relate to people who have had to like deconstruct beliefs and guilt and all of that, but just being raised in it alone was enough to fuck some things up.
Yep. Also, I'm a deconstructing being a Swiftie as of yesterday. So I'm
saw
relating again.
that.
I'm relating again.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to you about that. What was the this is not necessarily related to anything that we normally talk about, but what was the final straw for you? I mean, the new album coming out and some of the lyrics.
Yeah, well, I mean, to use her words, it's been a long time coming for me. I've been working on a project of deconstructing white supremacy for like 3 years now. And I think I've known in my subconscious that like, yeah, I'm going to have to give her up. I've written about in the next book about how like over-identifying with a celebrity is usually a trauma thing. And, you know, we do it for a reason. And I've started to understand all of the reasons, started to distance myself a lot recently, then tried to dive back in for the new album because it's fun. And it was terrible, right? But I had like a crack in the ideology moment for sure, where, you know, I mean, I've been on an anti-racist journey, and one of the rules is when Black people tell you something's racist, believe them. And so, you know, this time it was so blatant. But one of the things that really comes down to for me is like, she knows that any reference from her to any woman of color, not to mention a Black woman, in any negative way is going to result in real, actual racist action from parts of her fan base. And like, that's what I can't forgive her for. She has a responsibility to not do that. You know, we're all going to compare ourselves to our significant other's exes, and I just relate it to like, I have a weekly podcast with a Black woman and who I'm friends with, who is in my book, and I love her and I don't care how badly she betrayed me. I can't go to my white audience and complain about her. That's going to predictably end up with racist action toward her. And like, if I understand that, I think Taylor Swift should understand that. And it really, it also made me really see, you know, like she has surrounded herself with Black people on her stage, her singers, her dancers, and nobody told her. So now I think a whole kind of thing about her leadership. You know, a lot of this has been a long time coming because while I was like a lyrics music Swiftie, you know, when I was 23 and 26, I was at war. I was missing out on years of pop culture at a time. Like, I did not know who 1989 was about until the re-release, you know? So, yes, I see it all now, and I feel so guilty about not having seen and listened earlier, and trying very much to, you know, not judge when we wake up, just do forward and do better. But it's been interesting. But I did just have a moment that I said, you know, if Black women, and in this case, like Rebecca, who's part of my personal deconstruction and my podcast, like said, you have to walk away from Taylor Swift for us to trust you, would you do it? And I was like, yeah, okay. So there we go. Which is interesting because I have a whole part of being a Swiftie playfully throughout the book, but also talking about the difference between like an identity and a cult. So, you know, life happens in real time. And
it does.
Well, I admire that even though you've been so pro Taylor Swift and you love her so much that you're willing to just be like, hey, you know, this isn't right. Because I know that's not easy to do, especially when you've been a fan for a long time.
And also that's what it is, you know, part of why I'm like, we lost Harry Potter. We survived. We lost, you know, like this keeps happening, which is just continual reminders not to idolize people.
Yeah, totally.
But it's also been interesting to me to be like, it's not like we were brainwashed, right, into this like ideology, but you can still have a crack in an ideology. And like, seeing that again, as educated as I am now from the inside, I'm like, okay, this is interesting, you know? And I have been a Taylor Swift fan since I was 18. But I think back and I was an indigent teenager by myself in America, patching and working my way through college. And I wasn't a princess and my life wasn't a fairy tale, but I could look like that. And I could use these lines and weave them into my lines and my speech. interestingly enough, now that I know that I am ADHD and I have unmitigated echolalia, I'm like, well, I need 12 hours a day of new music and I need new song lyrics to weave all in throughout my language
Right.
because that's
To have going
just
over and over in your head for no reason
Yes.
all day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same.
So not only do I have to mourn 20 years of music, do I have to pull myself open and look at the white supremacy and think about all that stuff, but also like I have to unbraid this out of my language and my like means of communication. Like I'm writing a musical, I've used lines.
Oh.
There, there's just a lot.
Wow.
Like
What don't you do? My goodness.
science and math.
Okay. Well, you can't be perfect.
I
Yeah.
listened to your podcast where you interviewed Candy Carpenter,
Candy Carpenter.
and now I'm obsessed with her. And you talked about your musical in that episode. And to me, I love musicals, and Book of Mormon was amazing. And that's kind of what I'm picturing, just kind of that like.
Yeah, can
all
I
that
tell you the
stuff.
quick story? So
Yeah,
I was at
please.
Hamilton last holiday season, right? Went to
I love
Hamilton,
Hamilton.
and as I was watching it, my first thought was like, oh, I have to be on that stage. Like that is the culmination of my cult baby life in the performance cult, right? That produced Joaquin and River Phoenix. And like I was trafficked as an international performer my whole life. Like that's what I'm going to do. So a few weeks later, I was like, well, I'm not a Broadway trained actress, singer, or dancer, so I guess I have to write a musical, right? Like that's the way I'm going to get there. And so I was saying to my Brazilian host daughter who was with us for the holiday, and I was saying, I don't know if it's going to be the Book of Mormon, but for all cult babies, or if it's going to be women soldiers on the stage fighting patriarchy and white supremacy. And then I was like, oh, it's
Ooh.
both.
Right.
So that's kind of how it is set up. It is like the first half is children coming up under high control religion, singing and dancing and performing. The children are puppets because cult children are puppets, and because I don't want to make new child actors.
Smart.
And then the second half is women in the military fighting patriarchy and white supremacy. So I've written one song called Have a Day. I played it to all my women veterans and femme veterans, and they love it. But then also all of my cult survivors who grew up as little soldiers in God's army relate to it too. And it's kind of interesting where so Uncultured, to write a memoir about my life, you have to go like so into detail about your
Right.
personal journey. And then for the musical, I feel like it's the other way around where
Right.
I try to just zoom out. But one of the
Right.
things, my new book, I've read all the stuff. I really researched, and a lot of the experts say cults are the same. Like at the end of the day, it's the same. The way we control people is the same, which means there's a generic cult baby experience, right? So it's like Book of Mormon can be so specific to Mormonism because there's enough ex-Mormons and people who kind of
Right.
know and want to laugh about Mormonism to make that audience. But one of the things I've said for a long time since writing Uncultured is like I'm setting out to show that having a cult experience is not niche. And there's a
Right.
generic way to talk about it. And I think I'm helping to build that language. And I think part of why I'm here at this time on Earth is just to help build the language for our shared experience. Because, there's a huge amount of millennials who kind of lost their parents and their childhoods to religious extremism. And we are all trying to figure out how to heal from that, how to not pass down the trauma, how to understand what happened to us. One of the things that a lot of experts say is if you don't understand cult trauma, it's really hard to heal from it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who don't realize that they're in cults when they are cults because like you talk about MLMs and AA and those, sort of things. I've always thought they were a little culty, but like when you really break it down, they are full ass cults.
Yeah.
And even like I knew I grew up in a cult. I had already written Uncultured. I already told the whole story of what that was like. And when I heard a cult expert say cults are all about labor, I understood my life for the first time. I was like, oh, I was a singing, dancing actress / street beggar for Jesus, trafficked around the world. Our product was entertainment. All cults are organized crime. Like all of this stuff. Like I immediately understood it.
Like you're still
But
learning and finding things out even after you've already felt like you've learned and deconstructed
There's
from everything.
always more.
yes. And what was so interesting to me about that was a decade before that, I had listened to Jenna Miscavige's book about growing up in Scientology and realized our childhoods were the same. And the thing I identified was the child labor, right? So like I knew it in my soul. I knew it. I just didn't have that language, like that piece, right? I shared this video once on my social media and I was like, this is what like white, shiny religious trafficking looks like. And somebody said to me, oh my gosh, I watched that growing up. And I used to wonder how they got you to do that. And it was such a weird moment for me, right? Because I was like, what do you mean? They controlled everything about our lives. They starved us. They beat us. They raped us, right? And by the way, performing was kind of sometimes the only time we got to be a little bit free or at least favored. But that's not what it looks like, right? It doesn't look like a bunch of abused, harmed children. It looks like a bunch of shiny little white kids bopping around, culturally appropriating music that doesn't belong to them for Jesus.
And you're dressed in regular clothes. Like there wasn't like a culty uniform. So like you just look like regular kids in those videos. And I think that's kind of what throws it off too, because you're like, they look so happy and clean and they're in regular like clothes of the time. It's not like you're in clothes of, like colonial clothes or like Mormon denim with the pompadour braid thing. But and it does kind of throw you off. It's like, oh, they look happy. They look healthy and clean. But
that's why I say, for example, that the FLDS church is the best thing that ever happened to the regular Mormon, church cult. Because they can go, no, they're the cult. I still get corrected all the time. They'll be like, whoa, you mean the FLDS? And I'm like, no, I mean the regular guys.
The mainstream one.
The mainstream, exactly. And it's like we were trafficked. The children of God performed twice in the White House. In the H.W. Bush White House, we performed for the president of Brazil. We wrote a marching song for Marcos of the Philippines that was played on Philippine television every hour. Like we were marketing, we had a founding member of Fleetwood Mac join the Children of God early on, run these huge music and video production programs, all, trading on the name and name recognition. And then we had an army of 10,000 beggars, probably 7,000 of us, we estimate, children and teenagers that could just hit the streets of the world selling and performing and selling.
I heard you mention, I think somebody was asking you, like, how could you compare the military and the Children of God as, as both as cults? And I think you said something like, well, no, you're right. The military is actually worse. There's more murders and rapes that occur within the US.
Yes, I say you are right. Yeah. The United States military has absolutely raped and murdered more people than the Children of God. Same when people are like, oh my gosh, how? Because I say Mormonism is one of the most dangerous cults out there. I mean, obviously, I think right at this time in history, MAGA is right there doing very bad, dangerous stuff. But through our country's history, a lot of it, Mormons have been, one of the worst ones. Well, I think one of the things that differentiates me from some other, like people who've just been in a cult or people who have studied cults, is like I was in two such cults, the Children of God and the military. And like in the beginning of my actual study of this, I was like, okay, if it happened in the cult and it happened in the army, then I know that it's either about power and control or programming and influence. Right. So like even when I didn't have I put in Uncultured that the cult would do panty checks on us at night and creeped everybody out. Nobody wanted this detail. Yeah, we weren't allowed to sleep with underwear. And
they would check.
Yeah. And they would check.
I've read half of it. I don't think Aaliyah's had a
And
chance yet.
No, I haven't had
I had to put that detail in there because in the
Yeah.
Army they check our underwear again, right? Like
Well,
there's underwear rules again. And
the
I was
underwear, what is it with the underwear? Because the Mormons
it's
too.
oh my gosh, it's a whole section in the new book, how cults always control your underwear. But like this is part of how I work, right? So I wrote that in the book, but then when I started building my audience, I was like, all right, y'all, we got to talk about the underwear, right? Like what is it? And now I have this whole like research thing, but it basically, it comes down to like it's private, it's nasty, it's taboo, right? But also like if they can convince you that underwear is important, like your mission is so important that even your underwear matters.
Yeah.
Like they can convince you about a lot of things. So
Right. And it's such a personal thing. So it's like I can't even choose how I wear my own undergarments.
Like the layer that's closest to my body, I don't have any choice.
And it's great for predators because if you have underwear rules, you also have excuse for inspections. And that, becomes its whole own thing. I think part of the emotional kind of like weight of writing Uncultured, I was like, you have to take off all this armor that you put on to write the book and then realize that like, oh, maybe you didn't need all that armor in the first place, and like really because now I know how to explain it, right? So like at 15, I am this person in an almost grown up body, but I just present as like an American teenager, but I have no identity. I have no knowledge of how to function. Like the only thing I know how to do is work hard and be perfect. And, so high school's perfect example, right? Teachers loved me. Counselors loved me. Students, not a one could name me probably, And so high school is very, very rough. And
Yeah, they can now.
right.
They probably all bragging, yeah, I went to high school. We were great friends.
Yeah. But, and then what happened in college was kind of cool was that, so in college, freshman year, got invited to a party and like fell in with this crowd that was the chess team. And our school had the best chess team in the world. And at the time, and what that meant was we recruited from absolutely everywhere to this school in Dallas, Texas. And so I was in a room that had like 25 people in it, and like only 2 of them were from the US. So like that's my jam. And the way I described that was like, well, when nobody's normal, nobody's weird, and like these days, what I know is I just need a very multicultural, diverse crowd around me all the time. And that's the better way to live life anyway. But, at the time, it was like, I don't know who I am, but I look like I'm supposed to be WASP girl from Texas. So, like, let me try to be her, and I think with the autism, which, by the way, my readers told me, right? Like people read early versions of my book and it was like, hey, sister, you're one of us, right? Like it was fascinating. I've been watching recently them talking about like the undiagnosed autistic women who like their special interest becomes like being pretty so that they can try to pass.
I talk about this all the time. Sorry. I'm like,
and try to pass, but like it doesn't work, And so all of the masking and all of the ways, but I was never deep enough into the masking. Like I always wanted to tell people I grew up all over the world. I speak these languages, I blah, blah, blah. Like I couldn't be quiet and play the quiet, basic, boring blonde girl from Texas. And so it was that we expect you to be this and you're not. One of the things I think is beautiful about my life now is like when people see a lady with rainbow hair in all crochet actively knitting at the cocktail party, and then I say, oh, I'm a cult scholar, right? People are like, yeah, that makes sense,
Right.
So there's no
That tracks.
there's no expectation for me to be normal anymore. And I spent
Right.
so many years masking. That's basically what breaks me, and I think maybe almost killed me several times. And finally I just had to be like, no, I have to, one, figure out who I am. And that was very interesting too. It was like, again, I had written Uncultured. I was almost done with my master's degree. I remember I was on the phone with a PhD in organizational psychology who was helping me think through, talking about the book. I had just taken a whole semester in group social identity theory. And I had this moment where I'm like, oh, I never got to form a personal identity, right? 33 years old, already have a 4-year-old who's in the midst of that. And I go, okay, but like, I can do that. And one of the reasons I think, I know I'm out of deconstruction now and I'm in like the world notwithstanding, a pretty happy place in my life is because I am one whole person and I know who I am and I'm that person all the time. Although if you ask parts of TikTok, I'm a psychological operation who works for Donald Trump.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
you're a psyop who's trying to.
If you are, you're not doing a very good job because you make them look even shittier than they do on their own. So.
Just wait for my psyop Halloween costume. It's almost done.
Ooh.
You know what it is? It's because you explain things in a way that makes us feel less scared. And you said something the other day. You said that I've learned not to let the president of the United States be in charge of my happiness. And I was like, holy shit, I need to figure out how to do that because it's really hard not to just be, curl up in a ball. And I appreciate you for saying that because I need to figure out how to do that too.
So joy is resistance, right? And I think, for example, Portland is doing a good job of showing us that right now, right? And also mocking billionaires. But like, think if we could organize a knit-in of a huge amount of people to come out to DC, like how much fun that would be, but also like we could make change and do stuff.
They sound so stupid going like, oh, they're knitting. Like, okay, and like those fuckers, they're having a great time and making beautiful art. And you're like, okay, and that's wrong.
Well, and I think so, joy is resistance and color is resistance, and women are good at this. And a big part of, I think, even what I do with my channel and like the outfits and the women's work of knitting and the brilliant explanations of complicated things and serious topics is like, yeah, we don't have to do it the same way it's always been done in this men's way. And it's not worse when we add joy and whimsy and whatnot to it.
Noe and I were talking about that. We were in this cute little store in San Diego. We were on vacation and they just had cute, whimsical things, silly things with sayings on it. And I love toys. I love that kind of stuff. I like collecting stickers, things like that. And everybody sees it as childish or whatever. But Noe's like, yeah, but when guys have their sports teams and they can be obsessed with that kind of stuff, or they have their action figures and everything, it's fine for them.
It's normal for them.
But we're children.
Right. And I'm kind of really actively conscious of this. And I don't know if you saw I have knitting needle swords that are coming out with my book.
Obsessed.
So it's a pretty serious book. I mean, it's still my personality, but it's a researched book. It is my honorary PhD to myself. But I cannot explain how if I had stood in front of a traditional publisher and said, one, the way I'm going to sell thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of books is by calling myself knitting cult lady and going on the internet to explain bad guys to people, they would have said, what? And the knitting needle swords, they would have laughed and said, no, that's cute. But like my kid came up with this. I said it to my indie publisher, who's a woman veteran of color who knits and salsa dances. And she was like, what length? How do you want them to look? Blah, blah, blah. Like we got this thing and I have sold hundreds of them. I have a whole knitting bundle. Like nobody's getting people to buy tons of books now, but I'm getting people to buy $100 packages of
That's
knitting and a
incredible.
book, and like, it's going to be a thing, So this is
Yeah.
also this is my message for everyone that like don't listen to people telling you you can't do something unless they've done it,
Right.
because nobody predicted that the market for knitting and talking about cults was going to be this good, but like I have a whole
Exactly.
team
No,
now.
I just want to I think it's really cool, Daniela, that like you've taken this thing, which is the cults that or you being in multiple cults, with the Children of God and with being in the army, and the thing that you don't have an identity inside of, right? You don't have an identity when you're in these cults or these high control groups. And you are now selling that with things that are so closely tied to like the identity that you've created for yourself, for this whimsical, fun knitting with sword needles,
Right.
person that you have
It's
become.
And like
Yeah.
people were begging for a pattern, and all my patterns are pretty basic, and we given all the products these cute culty names. So I did like, okay, I'll give you the pattern for the love bomb collar, and then right next to it is a explanation of what love bombing is and like a fact sheet on how to spot it.
That's so smart. Well, it's like people devalue so much like quote unquote women's art, even though obviously it's for
Yeah.
anyone.
And yeah, and something for me I would also say is very devalued is like, I mean, I call it professional Cassandras now, but the like work of like negative space. I have been in all these veteran entrepreneur programs. I have had just like so many straight white men told me that I will never make money only talking about the bad guys, and you can't only do what you want. You gotta pop out a quick 5 tips for CEOs that you can learn from cults.
Mm.
And, one of the things I realized during my master's was like, I think in a lot of ways they're just learning cult tactics and telling themselves they're the good guys. And then like
Right.
using cult tactics in corporate America. So instead, I'm going to use my knowledge of groups to help individuals. And I tell you, as soon as I realized that, like, that's when I started selling a lot of books and like really connecting with people. And
Right.
I love even like a lot of my creations now. I'm tearing something apart and turning it into something else. Like last winter, I spent the whole winter cutting sleeves off of jackets, putting them on something else. I cut the sleeve off of this sparkly green dress and added fuzzy sleeves. And it's this
Mhm.
really
Fun.
great thing I wore to New York. And then last weekend, I made these, everyone calls them my poison ivy gloves now, out of
Yes.
the sleeves. And so I like this concept that like you can create from the negative space, right? Like whether that's like you can take beauty and lessons from trauma, or you can make
Mhm.
new art simply by pulling other stuff apart and putting it in a different order and doing different stuff from it. But also like in deconstruction, like when we think of our cult stories or our experience with this very like black and white thinking, like binary thinking, it was good, it was bad. We don't have access to all those stories. As soon as you start deconstructing your cult experience, all of your stories are yours to use. All of your experiences are yours to use. In the years I wasn't walking around telling people that I was a carnival clown in Mexico trafficked as a teenager, like I wasn't doing a lot of that, but like I did balloons at my kid's kindergarten graduation party, and it was awesome because I'm not hiding any of the stuff anymore. It's just
Right.
Right.
all mine to use in whatever way I want to, even if it
Yeah.
like came from trauma or came from bad stuff.
You're like upcycling yourself. You're like, that's what you're doing. You're taking the parts of things that you don't like and taking things from bad experiences, bad clothing, this and that, and changing it into what makes it comfortable for you.
Look, I got to show you this other one that I did. This garment has a long story because this was a men's shirt that my husband got in a thrift store in Valparaiso, Chile. So already thrifted item on the other end of the world. And then I turned it into this jacket recently because first I turned it into
That's so
just a
cool.
vest for my kid, but my kid doesn't wear things that I make because a prophet is never appreciated in their own home.
Right.
But
right.
so now I just turned it into a jacket for myself this winter, and I'm excited about it.
So fun. And do you sell any of your clothes?
I do. I'm pretty proud that I make almost as much money consulting with my Harvard degree as I make knitting.
That's badass.
That's the dream right there.
These love bomb collars I sell. I sell a lot of stuff on my social media. I make a lot of these commission fuzzy coats and different stuff. So yeah, it's fun. And y'all talking about like joy and healing, right? So I had this conversation with my therapist recently and some friends because they're like, okay, what are you doing that you're not monetizing? Which is important. I get that. But when I really asked myself what brings the joy, it's trolling thrift stores. I love trolling thrift stores. I just did it all around the country. It's treasure hunting, right? It's the experience of getting an unknown thing and now it's yours, opening a package when you're a child that I didn't get to have, you know? So it's like, I like trolling thrift stores. And so now I'm in this thing where I make art that I like, and then eventually I put it in my shop and people buy it. And so I send it off to its new home. And then I am constantly finding new pieces and creating new things. Plus, I look like I have an endless wardrobe.
Right.
Yeah, there you go.
And we're an artsy group of people too, and that's just so smart because I don't know why it hasn't crossed my mind. Like, we can include all parts of ourselves, and I don't know, Christina, you need to get crocheting on some little demons or something, because I'm like, you know, we have all of these other talents besides this.
I told my straight white male husband this, and he scoffed a little bit, but I was like, no, I guarantee you knit in front of people long enough, they're going to want to buy the things that you're making.
I have to look. You don't have to look when you knit. And I'm like, I would just be sitting here this whole time, like, not paying attention.
Man, brains are so interesting. So my child and I are hyperlexive, and we pick up knitting right away. You show us a thing, we know how to do it. It doesn't matter how much time passes, we can still do it. And the only other person I've seen pick up knitting that fast is my adopted Brazilian host daughter. So maybe I just transmute it to people.
Yeah, maybe. Can you do it through this podcast, please?
My mom taught me to knit when I was 5, and she's an incredible knitter. And she has a channel where she just talks. And I was like, Mom, you should start knitting. And she said, I can't talk and knit like you can. I didn't know that. I didn't know that it was like, no, this was.
That's awesome.
Even that was interesting. I was 18 my freshman year of college, and we did the first learning tests, which incidentally are written by organizational psychologists. That's what I am now. And, this should have been my neurodivergent diagnosis probably, but teacher pulls me aside because I have the rarest form of learning, and it's called body kinesic, and we are coding in things through movement, right? Okay. And I immediately understood that, and I was like, oh, I know how to knit. So I went out that day. I remember I went to a Barnes & Noble's, was next to a Michael's. And I went to Barnes & Noble's and I bought a book stand. And I went to the Michael's and I bought a pair of knitting needles and some yarn. And I just knit my way through college and the Army. So I had been knitting for 23 years. So then I was 28 and pregnant with a girl. I said, you know what? Maybe I'm good enough to start making clothes. Because I had just been doing blankets, scarves, kind of like ADHD knitting. I don't have to look so I can read. It helps me focus. And then I started designing. And now I've been designing clothes for 10 years. And I've made so many things.
I was joking. Our first episode, Joey tells a story about how she buried her placenta and raccoons dug it up and were fighting over it, right?
No.
So the
raccoons ate my placenta.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I was joking that I shouldn't crochet little voodoo dolls, and then we could go to her grandma's house and put dirt from where she buried her placenta in little glass jars and attach it to the voodoo dolls and then put them on our merch shop. And I think people would be down for that.
You can. You just need to find your thing, right? So right now, my thing for this new book, my publisher was like, what's the coolest line? We're going to make it an art poster. And I said, cults always promise space travel. right? 'Cause that's a line in my new
Yes.
book. So we've
Yes.
got the
Yes.
bumper
Yes.
sticker with the little, I put little eyeballs in it, and somebody was like, I'm going to crochet you that. So this is Saturnita, but now
Oh my gosh.
everyone wants Saturnitas. And so she's sending me some, but I think what I'm going to actually do is go to the crochet club at UMD and pay them a fair wage to make me these and then sell them in my merch
That-
shop. And
That's
it's like,
great.
I'm going to have them at the
That's
book
awesome.
thing.
I love it.
That's,
And
yeah.
before we get onto another topic, can we talk about the space travel of Children of God? Can you talk a little bit
my
about
gosh.
what heaven was? Because that just kind of blew my mind, and I think everyone should hear that.
Yeah. And again, it's so funny because it's like not weird to me, but we were
Right.
taught that, like, heaven was a physical place inside the moon, and it was like a literal triangle city of gold that he got dimensions for in prophecy, like Noah's Ark ripoff, right? So here's what's so ridiculous. This is all in the next book, by the way. Like, we were so isolated from the world that it took someone a couple years to realize that, like, those dimensions don't actually fit in the moon. And then he came back and he was like, well,
Imagine that.
who are you going to believe? Me or the devil's scientists? They don't
Right.
actually know how to measure the moon, right? And kind of just like, it's metaphorical. Jesus told me this, goalpost moved. Yeah. So this was kind of the thing that happened was last Trump administration, he founded the Space Force, right? And here I was literally hopping around my house, just yelling, it's culty, it's culty. Like, I don't know why, but it's culty. Anyways, whole section in the book. It's one of my favorites. And it's just cults, like spaces where we go when the earth stops
Right.
believing, and like it's metaphorical space. Obviously, it's not always the space travel, but so many, right? Like the
Yeah.
Mormons have a planet, like Scientology is
Scientology.
obviously its
Right.
whole own thing, like Heaven's
Yeah.
Gate.
SpaceX.
No.
I'm just kidding.
And yes. But and I started thinking about all of it. And I was like, I think it's actually crucial to coercive control that, like, the thing that you're promising is always out of reach. And it's always like, you got to do some transformation. You got to do some work to get there. And then here's the crazy thing that I realized, like, in single family cults, sometimes it's Space Mountain. I've heard so many single family cults that use a promised trip to Disneyland or Disney World. And what I realized, my mom, who was a lovely, lovely human, always nice, even in a cult. And she used to tell us when we were kids, she'd be like, oh, if you learn Portuguese, I'll take you on a trip to Mozambique. Mozambique, it's how we pronounce it in Portuguese. And I always used to think, like, that's so weird. As an adult, I was like, she didn't have the resources to take us on a trip from Brazil to Mozambique for pleasure.
Right.
Neither were we being given the resources as children to learn Portuguese. So it was just this, her space travel was, I'll take you to Mozambique.
Right.
Right. It has
And
to be
now
out
this
of
is
reach.
this is a thing to strive for.
Why Mozambique of all places?
I just think it's because we were in Brazil at the time, and Mozambique is an African country that speaks Portuguese that has beaches. Like,
Yeah, okay.
also she was a 19-year-old teenager that had always been in a cult. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's fun
That
to
was
say.
her Space Mountain.
It is still to this day, it is on my list. I want to do a trip once where I just do all the Portuguese speaking, like, countries and parts of the world. And, like, I really do want to go to Mozambique. Like, I've had that
That would
desire
be
ever
awesome.
since I was.
That would be great if you could
was a
take
little
her
kid.
there. Like,
Mhm.
I made it happen,
Yeah.
y'all.
It would be great if you could organize a trip where you take people to Mozambique and we can just do crochet and knitting on the beach.
I just, oh my gosh, yeah. I have a little, except that I always tell people, if I invite you to my compound, don't come. Well, because one of the things that I tell people is beware of anyone that knows a lot about the bad guys, right? Like, why are all cults the same? Because if you want to truly harm and manipulate and control someone with brain science, you kind of had to study that from the people that know how to do it. And I used to not get that. I used to just be like, how do they know? Like, how are they? They're not this smart, right? But it's because they study the patterns. So generally, yeah, you want to be a bit suspicious of people that know a lot about bad guys because they know how to do it.
Right.
And so when I say that, people will go, oh, so we should be afraid of you? And I said, I mean, you don't think that if I wanted to start a cult, it would be a good, it
Right.
would be one that could get you and manipulate you? Like, yeah, I know how to do it. One of the choices I make every single day is to not coerce and manipulate people in order to exploit their labor. I don't find it to be that difficult, and so then I always joke, like, yeah, if I invite you to my compound, maybe don't come.
Right. You're like, it was a test and you failed.
And you failed. Yeah. Yeah, I've never been a good salesman because I've never wanted to deceive people. Everybody tells you, like, well, there's a little bit of deception. You have to bullshit your way and you have to this. And that's I've just never
So-
been good at that. So I don't think I could ever start a
And-
cult.
This is something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is consensual sales. And I get this a lot. And I get this from a lot of cult survivors who I believe have never maybe seen non-deceptive sales or non-deceptive sales tactics. And people will be like, are you a cult or a cult leader? Like, no, I create good content that makes you want to buy my stuff. And I pitch you stuff like a book or a cult coat, and then you give me X number of dollars and I give you book or cult coat.
Right.
And there's nothing deceptive about it, right? Like, we don't walk into Costco and are like, is this a cult? They're trying to sell to me, right? It's not
Right.
trying to sell you something that is deceptive, but so many, when all we care about is the numbers. Yeah, we're
Right.
gonna tweak the truth. We're gonna get a little bit, no, I can't stand it.
Yeah.
I also think one of the reason that I'm such a good salesperson and sell so much stuff is because I make very good products. And like, that's part of
Right.
the consensual sales, is that you have to have good products
Right.
and you're not gonna get rich quick scheme because you're going to provide quality products. And I actually, kind of failed at building a platform to sell my memoir from when I was just trying to sell my memoir. But it was the day I got up in January 2022 and I was getting ready to sit down and start working on this research book. And I said, I have a bunch of fascinating life stories and I'm about to do a cool project and I wonder if people want to know. And I think I don't try to sell my book. I just give away my expertise and then I say, oh, I wrote this book. It's pinned
Right.
here. And people buy it. And it's actually
I've-
been the most interesting for me when I have sold out, because I didn't make the New York Times, but I did sell Jeff Bezos out of books. And my audience would go into my shop and go buy my paintings, my prints and my art and my crafts, because when you are giving people useful information, especially of the kind that you and I trade in, that is helping people have these realizations, they want to support you. They want to
Right.
give you money so that you can keep doing that. So I absolutely encourage you to have some products that you can sell to your fans. I'm excited because with Culting of America, we have a deconstruction workbook, Unculture Yourself. And I think come January, there's going to be so many ex-MAGA, not to mention all of us, ex-Mormons, ex-Catholics, ex-evangelicals. I'm going to put myself through it to deconstruct Swiftianity, and I'm going to put it on my socials.
That's awesome. How do you I wanted to ask you about just being a controversial creator. That's something that I struggle with. have wanted to do this podcast forever. And I love that we finally, brought it to life. But every day I'm kind of like, are we going to be put on some list? And I know that you've had to restart TikTok accounts and you've been shut down and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I imagine that you probably have threats and, lots of negative stuff. And do you just go, I don't give a fuck. I'm saying what I want to say and they can come get me? Or
kind
do you
of,
worry?
yes. Right around the time when Uncultured was being released, I was asked to testify against my ex-husband so he could be kicked out of the military for extremism. So I had to go through the kind of like, okay, how scared am I going to be? And at that point, I decided I'm just not going to live my life scared and checking and all of that. Like, most bullies are cowards, and I hope that I don't get shot for doing what I do. But I believe in the stuff that I've been prepared to die my whole life for beliefs. And I believe in the stuff that I'm doing now more than I've ever believed in anything else. So that's one. Politically, yeah, I'm scared, but if I stop, then they've already won, and I won't give them that. And then finally, to be a controversial creator, which is great, by the way, right? Because it gets clicks, it gets numbers, it gets, right? Like, make people mad, happy, or glad. I have videos called bro shutdowns where I'm kind of just yelling at misogynists, and then I sell my have a day stickers or my books or whatever, and people love them. But you have to not care if people like you, I think, is one. Like, the people of the internet, not people in your life, but for sure. And I've heard a lot of other creators that are doing, especially political content and stuff, just be like, some people are just not going to like you. And you just have to be okay with that and just know that, like, you're going to find your crowd. And then the other thing is that this kind of idea of cancel culture is pretty fake, I think. It's consequence culture. Like, you say one thing and people stop listening to you is because you did something pretty bad. Because the reality is you have to work really hard to keep yourself in the news and in the media all the time. And if you do that, like, you're gonna be able to keep your thing going. I spent the whole year before Uncultured came out just terrified, right? I was like, what is the military going to do to me? Nothing. They ignored it, right? What are vet bros? I remember being like, any man in a uniform, especially a white man, they're going to listen to them more. And I would kind of say everything I was afraid of happened. Like, I lost friends and family. I had other authors come out against me and write nasty stuff. And, like, turns out you can say whatever you want about me. You still have to have a bigger platform than me. And even when that did happen, it only sent me people. I also think for me, it's been part of my own journey of stopping to be a people pleaser and speaking truth to power. And one of the things I like to do is model for other women and girls out there that, like, you just don't have to take people's shit. You don't. And the other thing I've found is, like, yeah, when you first start, it's a big shock to the people in your real life. But once you're really in the business of, like, creating and entertaining and pushing stuff out, nobody has enough time to follow all my stuff. Like, the people in my real life, every once in a while I'll be like, oh, I hope my mom doesn't have time to watch this one, or, whatever. And, like, but
I feel that.
I watched so many of your videos that TikTok wanted to verify that I was a human. They made me do this, like, thing where I had to fit the puzzle piece into the thing because they're like, why are you watching all these videos one after another? And I'm like, I'm researching, motherfuckers. I'm a human.
I love that this kind of, like, video and content creation medium has, like, allowed us to connect with people. And I feel like I do a lot of joint creation with my audience, or, like, joint healing with my audience, or, like, joint language learning. And it feels very nice for someone who hates being alone.
Yeah. I was going to ask, do you still keep in contact with all of your siblings, or is there any family that's still in the the cult, or is the cult still a thing? It changed its name, right? I think
the cult kind of fell apart in 2009. And I think it started with the death of the founder. Like, it's seen as a cult that successfully passed down, but I think the fracturing was starting then, but also the internet. And honestly, I think we're seeing it with Mormonism. No, it's just taking longer. But the Children of God for 50 years was 10,000 people kind of in perfect isolation from the world, living as this army around the world. And then in 2009, they just realized like what ends cults is when you fail to keep or recruit the next generation.
Right.
And they were not able to do that. Because as extreme of a life as we were living, as soon as we started seeing that there was stuff out there, they brought the internet in because they could use it to sell more, but then they kind of broke their cult with it. So in 2009, they were kind of like, hey, so Jesus told us he's not coming back in our lifetime anymore. And I feel like they just blew up their mission, and they were like, you can still stay, like, go to work, put your kids in school, like, now that you're 60, 70 years old, we're just going to drop you, but like, we'll be here online. So
damn.
Oh my God.
the last time I stole a year-end report from them, from my spy network, they had about 1,400 people and very like anemic. It's not what it was. Like, where I grew up doesn't exist anymore. However, my grandfather still runs the money. And that's my only kind of direct family member. Of my 25 siblings, the 22 that are still with us are all out. Yep.
25?
Sex cult math.
Oh my God.
I try not to talk about my siblings to let them have their own lives.
Right.
Sure.
I will just say that, like, if you ever write a book, your only choice you get to make is, do you want to be a public person or not? Because once you make that choice, you don't really get to predict how that's going to go. And I learned a lot. I
Right.
definitely lost some siblings and some family members who don't want me around anymore. And also, just like I always say it, like, when you're the one deconstructing the family gatherings, they don't really want you to be invited to the family gatherings. But at the same time, at some point when my family left the cult, I kind of went into eldest daughter mode, taking care of my family, and became the scapegoat again. And at some point, kind of decided I wasn't going to do that. And I kept getting told by a number of people that, well, we just don't do negative topics. And so I decided that my rule for the next phase of my life was going to be, I don't do off limits topics. I study cults and bad guys. I talk about hard stuff. That's just who I am. That I won't go back to like the code switching. I don't have a version of me that's like calm and quiet and polite. It's just autistic and knitting and talking about cults and asking hard questions and getting to know new people. And so I will also say that, like, all the stuff I was afraid of happened. None of it was as bad as I thought it could have been. And the good stuff has been so good. Like, the people that I have met, the people that I've helped, there are times in my life where I wanted to die because of the trauma, and I was able to take my trauma and turn it into something. And I think it's really beautiful that, like, my journey and my trauma gets to help other people. But what I didn't expect was that, Uncultured is a book about being alone, like being alone in a basement, being abused by a pedophile, being alone on a tower in Afghanistan, wanting to jump off. And I still get triggered back to bad moments of my life, but I don't feel alone. I feel like 50,000 people have held my hand and walked through this story with me. And because I sign books and interact with my audience, like, I know names, like, I can be in deep despair and like picture Noe and just be like, somebody out there gets it. Like, somebody out there has been through this story with me, so I've had a very healing effect, I would say, from my audience as well.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
That's one of my favorite parts of doing the show. It's like automatically, like, it's a new friend every time. It's like, this is a great way to find a community, because just from what it
Yeah.
is, we're going to probably get along and have interesting stories and connect over something. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. I was trying not to fangirl too hard.
It's still funny when people do that with me, but then every once in a while, like I'll get to meet someone that I'm a big fan of, and then I still do it. So that's funny. But no, I mean, I love. We did a little mini tour recently and got to meet a bunch of people in person, and that's always nice. And I mean, these days I get recognized when I go out. The rainbow hair helps, and so
Right.
it's nice.
You don't blend in.
I would say like there's so many hard parts about doing this job, but like the connections with people in person and virtually is absolutely the best part.
Yeah. I was worried. I mean, I know that you are not like a hard ass or anything like that from watching your videos and everything. But I'm like, oh my gosh, are we going to have to, tone stuff down because we have dark humor and all that kind of stuff? And it's like we talk about some really deep shit, but we always try to throw in some, some jokes or some shit talking about, whatever. And then when I heard your podcast with Candy, I was like, no, she's going to fit right in with us. Like, we don't have to censor anything. Yes, for sure.
It's important. It's important. And I think I always say, like, I only want cult survivors to make drink the Kool-Aid jokes, but we got to joke about how dark it was. And we got to,
Right.
I once wrote like half of a stand-up special, but I don't know if I would be very good at that. But like, yeah, like you can make jokes about all of the horrible stuff that we've been through and have that be both part of healing and part of cultural critique,
Mhm.
and I think that is just part of
That's what it's all about.
It's,
part
it's
of this.
cathartic for us, for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely been cathartic for sure.
But I appreciate how much shit you talk about Trump. That is like the greatest thing ever. I mean, I love the cult stuff, but I know you ended up on my algorithm. I'm like, actually, I don't know. Was it the knitting? Were you on my were you creative
Well-
TikTok? Were you on my cult TikTok? Were you on my hating Trump TikTok? It's like, you're all the things that you're like,
That's
I
been-
love.
That's been an interesting part of this timeline because it's like, yeah, we're going through horrible things and these things are really, really affecting people's lives. And I absolutely never want to downplay that. But like professionally, I don't think I could be more well placed. And I wrote a book called The Culting of America. And I now feel like the president of the United States writes copy for me every day, and like,
Right.
Well, not
so-
him. He's not that intelligent, but like everybody else around him.
Right. But like, I mean, for 50 years, the cults have been trying to get the White House and now they have it and we're on this timeline. And, it's actually something I've been telling my audience a lot. And I think anyone who has survived coercive control or like any kind of authoritarian abusive relationship is triggered right now, right? We're triggered. We are exhausted. I don't know about any of you, but I'm so angry. Like, I can't come up with fear for Trump because I'm so angry. Like, I'm
Right.
so angry that I fought so hard for 35 years and healed and wrote a book and built a business. And like, I was supposed to get to ride off into the sunset and now we got to do this. So it's like, one, we got to know we're triggered and we got to like take care of ourselves. But for two, like we have skills that people that had nice, normal childhoods, especially white millennials in America, like don't have. And we know we can survive this. And like, not all of us maybe, but, as a group,
Yeah.
like we cult survivors and trauma survivors, like we are good during times of crisis and trauma and all of those things, like dissociation, like you don't want to be doing that all the time. You want to work on that in therapy, but like people ask part of how I can be so happy and do what I do. And it's like, well, I'm good at dissociation. Like when I want to turn off the cult world and go be with my people and do my art and do my stuff, like I can do that.
Mhm.
I call it the I can do it with a broken heart, like the skill that all cult babies and veterans have, that like no matter what we are going through personally, emotionally, like when it's time to go, we can go.
Right.
And if we do that our whole lives, we die young, right? Like it's not okay to do it all the
Sustainable.
time.
Right.
Yeah.
But like in a pinch, that can really help you
Yeah.
out.
It comes in handy.
Exactly. You know,
I'm tired of living in unprecedented times personally.
Right.
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
that is
But
for
it's
sure.
definitely a trauma response to be in that state all of the time, you know?
Absolutely.
Yep.
We
Yeah.
have
Yep.
a funny little segment that we like to end with. Are you game for 7 minutes in heaven?
Of course.
Okay, so our first question is fuck, marry, kill. The options are different every time. We have some lovely choices for you today. Kid Rock, the ghost of Hulk Hogan, or a colonial era Mormon man in nothing but his garments.
Oh my goodness. All right. I mean, I just definitely want to kill Kid Rock.
Yeah,
Don't we all?
That's the right choice, yes.
Yes.
that'll be the episode name. We all want to kill Kid
So,
Rock.
yeah, I think it would be fuck the Mormon guy because they're usually pretty, and then marry the ghost because
Right.
dead husbands
Fuck
are
off,
probably the
ghost.
best.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a guy.
A dead husband's a good husband.
I say, don't let my husband hear this.
Except all of our husbands.
Except for our
Right.
husbands.
Okay, number 2, what was the most ridiculous thing you believed in terms of scripture or doctrine in your past religious life?
Or I guess this could apply to your life as an army person because it doesn't
Right.
seem like you ever really bought into the children
good
of God
point.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I just feel pretty ridiculous that we believed that the war in Afghanistan was about helping.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 3, who do you think is the hottest deity? And this can be any character or mythological figure from any religion, any culture.
Okay, deity. I don't know. I think I have a thing for Cersei. I think I'm going to go Cersei.
Right,
She's a
right.
Greek god, but she's also the witch.
Yes.
And you really only hear about Cersei a few times. So one of them is in the Odyssey when she just for no reason turns Odysseus' men into pigs, and then he pulls out his sword and confronts her, and then she just falls apart and sleeps with him. Anyway, there's a
As you
great
do.
novel. There's a great novel called Circe by Madeline Miller. One of my like favorite genres of fiction just for fun is like Greek mythology retold by feminists. And
Oh.
Madeline Miller has written a book all about Circe, and she's also written Song of Achilles, where Patroclus and Achilles are lovers. And
I love
they're
that.
both absolutely phenomenal. But yeah,
That's
Circe.
Awesome. Okay, so number 4, what's your Jello salad? And for non-Mormons, this means, is there any dish from your former religious life that you still enjoy or like to make? I've read some of your book, and it didn't sound like there was many culinary delights. So if there's anything, or you could tell us the worst one if you want.
No, I was hungry a lot, but I feel very lucky that I got to grow up in Brazil. And actually, though I was a kitchen slave from the age of 11, I was a kitchen slave in a part of Brazil, Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais, that's known for very good food. And then in a part of Mexico, Guadalajara, that's known for very good food. And my like most comfort food is just it's called feijoada, and it's like Brazilian black bean trash soup kind of with everything in it,
Yum.
and it is amazing. What I bring to parties though is strawberry mango salsa.
Oh, that sounds
Mm.
good. That's a lot more fun than our Mormon stuff. We have Jello and casseroles, and that's it. If you were to start a cult today, what would the uniform be?
Boy. I don't know. It would definitely be like a very bright color. It would be like everyone wears purple or everyone wears red. because there's a thing about like how we connect with each other through really bright colors that I'm fascinated with. And it would probably have some like knitting or crochet, like you have
Yeah,
to
of
like
course.
make
To
your
join
own
the
clothes.
cult, everyone has to buy your outfits. Right?
Yeah.
Yes, there you go.
You gotta learn how
Okay.
to make these gloves and then wear them and then make them for free for the mission. So
Right.
yeah,
because
there you
it's
go.
labor that makes it culty.
Right. There
Right,
you
the
go.
labor
We're
every
getting close.
time.
Okay. And 6, what is your favorite curse word?
I mean, I'm a soldier, so I use fuck and fucking like a comma. So I'll probably just go with that. But when I spill coffee all over my desk, I cuss only in Portuguese, the way that I did in the book when I
Oh.
broke my leg.
Can you give us a little clip of what that sounds like?
Ai, meu Deus do céu, que merda! Ai, eu sempre tô fazendo essa coisa horrível.
Thank
Oh,
you.
I love it. That's great.
Did a lot of
Amazing.
fun with that in Afghanistan.
Number 7, our last question is, what's your guilty pleasure? Do you
What
have a
is
guilty pleasure?
my guilty pleasure? So like raisins.
funny.
In the cult, we weren't allowed to have sugar, and sugar was demonized. And kind of like the only treat we ever really had as kids was raisins. And so Children of God people feel all kind of ways. But like I buy bags of raisins from Costco, and whenever I want, I just have a handful of raisins.
That is so funny because I do the same thing with dried fruit. I grew up with a very like health conscious, like old school kind of Mormon. And I thought that was just a part of Mormonism as a whole. And turns out it was just my really crunchy family. So I also have a thing where I'm just like always eating handfuls of dried fruit. So that is
Yeah.
funny.
And I just want to say this is a thing to recognize. Like it took me some learning to be like, okay, American comfort food is not my comfort food. I need Brazilian food. And like there are things from the cult that I need because no matter how horrible our childhoods were, like that's what made us. Those things still bring us nostalgia. And that's like an
Right.
important part of who you are.
Yeah, especially when you didn't
So yeah.
have much comfort. So, of course, we have to shout out all of your socials and your book that is coming out in January, right? Do you want to tell us where people can find you?
Absolutely. So I am Knitting Cult Lady on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. Pick your choice. I have my critically acclaimed memoir, Uncultured. You can buy that anywhere you buy books. You can get signed copies from me. And also it's on Spotify Premium and audiobooks everywhere and many libraries. Culting of America is available for pre-sale now, mostly through us and Amazon because I'm doing the indie book this time. But we will have the link in the show notes.
Yes,
And
we will.
We will.
check out our knitting packages. Like learning to knit with swords is really fun.
I'm so excited.
I just sat there swashbuckling with it the other night while I was watching
I
TV.
can't
I
wait
was
to
like, "This is so
swashbuckle."
great."
Yeah. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
It's
We
so great.
are
Thank
honored
you.
and trying not to fangirl. Before we started the podcast, we were talking about who's dream guests. Like, oh, we couldn't possibly. And we agreed that you were one of them. You came up in the conversation. So we're just very flattered and
Oh
we
my
appreciate
gosh.
you
Well,
so much.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you
I'm
for
so
coming
flattered
on.
as
Thank
well.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Girls Gone Godless. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this episode. It helps heathens like you find bitches like us. Check the link in the show notes to stay up to date on the latest heathen news and how you can become a guest on the show, or leave us a tip if you're feeling generous. See you next Sunday. Stay blasphemous.